So today, Aufstreichen, we're going to go through actual specific techniques as they're laid out in the early sources. Next. So today, this is content that we've been leading up to for the past several weeks. Aufstreichen, the root Streichen. Hopefully I've given credit in previous videos, but I'll do it again. Christian Trosclair, one of the, I would say, leading HEMA scholars of the current day, has done pretty good work doing various things like translating certain passages and interpretation and things. And so Aufstreichen, even though like in, across the corpus of the German tradition, that term gets used quite a bit, it actually is, in a lot of the tradition, it's just mentioned as a technical term. The early commentary in the same manuscript where we draw a lot of the text from Ringek, later in that source, there is a section called Stück im Aufstreichen. Basically, the plays or the techniques from Aufstreichen. And what I like about Christian's work is that he actually translated Streichen as sweep, right? So sweep up, Aufstreichen, or sweep through, Durchstreichen. So yeah, it really kind of captures the idea that like we're starting in kind of a lowered position, usually at the end of some sort of like strike, some sort of cut, and from down here, we're actually going to bring ourselves up. One of the things I'll show in a little bit is there have been ideas of actually doing that sweep in sort of an oppositional way to the person's cut. And what we really want to emphasize today is that rather than sort of going opposite in a clashy way against the person's cut, we're actually going to really match the angle of that person's incoming cut, either from below or from above, which yields distinct dynamic advantages to doing it that way. And most importantly, with regard to all of the techniques today, I think it is a much stronger match to what's being described, especially when those techniques are using the term Durchstreichen, actually sweeping through or stroking through. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But before we get into the partner stuff, just a couple of emphases in terms of mechanics, right? So this whole idea, this sort of like moulinet kind of motion is what we've been looking at as the key model for using Aufstreichen. And we had, coming up with the short edge, coming up with the long edge, and coming up with the hanger, right? All of those can apply here. The specific techniques that are coming from that Ringek manuscript really sort of focus on, as a default, using the short edge coming up. So we're going to focus on those particular ones, but anybody can take these and play with them and actually try using the long edge and try using the hanger. One of the key things that is mentioned in Ringek here is that they say, it's more, you want to do it from your, actually, let me just read the text. Okay, so if we look at the text, it says, one shall execute the sweeps from the left side because when they are from the right, they are not as certain as from the left. So, so remember that when we do this, we have kind of a couple of different ways to go. When I come up this way, this is on my left side, and you notice that my hands are crossed as I do it. And there's a certain structural integrity that the crossed hands, it's just kind of like stronger here. When I come up, so that's when I'm doing this. Here's my parry, here's my attack. Parry, attack. When I switch it, so I do my attack, parry, especially if you do this one-handed, you'll notice when you come up this way, this is kind of this weird, weak angle, which really kind of stinks. Like any sort of pressure from here will make this pop out of my hand really, really easily. So I think that's why Ringek is saying, or whoever from that source is saying, come up on this side if you can, right? This is the really good parry angle against someone who's cutting from their preferred side is a righty, right? They're going to want to cut like a right Zornhau, like this. And that will allow me to match this side, get underneath, and do a really simple defense and get to their outside very easily. If they're going to cut the other way, this is just a little bit weaker. And that is specifically, when we're talking about the short edge. The other kind of interesting note is that you can actually solve the sort of like structural problem, if we understand it correctly, by going this way. Once you switch to the long edge version of this, here, rather than here, this really sort of bad broken wrist kind of position, you're shorter by a little bit, but your structure is better. And in fact, this position, go back to the other side, from here, from here to here, here to long edge. This long edge version, I think, gets mentioned quite a bit by Joachim Meyer towards the end of the tradition. So again, I wouldn't look at those things as, the early sources say to do it one way, the later sources to do it a different way. I think they're simply different variations that get called out. And this whole model, as we have done with Krump, and as we're probably going to be showing with other things like Schiel in a little bit, this whole framework on what Aufstreichen is something that you can take and apply across pretty much the whole tradition, pretty much any source that's talking about Aufstreichen. Next, we're going to actually kind of look at some of those blade geometries with a partner. So what we're going to do now is actually do sort of a deep dive into each one of those techniques and show how they all fit tactically, right, and mechanically. So all of them kind of work off of a starting point of person cuts in from their right, like a right wrath cut. And, there's lots of different parries we can do, but the idea is when he cuts in, I'm going to do a parry actually from underneath. And we've done a video on this where I want to try to get my edge not only on his flat, so not this actually, right? And if I have you positioned over this way, right, blade comes over this way, and I want to make sure that we're showing not this, right, but this. That's what we're trying to get every single time. Okay, so when he cuts from his right, I'm going to sweep upward, right? That's kind of the initial idea. And then, of course, we can kind of continue to do that from my side as well. So basically, nice flow drill. So I'm attacking from my right, so I step with my right. And then when I defend, I get to his outside, stepping with my left. So you should be able to do this with just 2 steps, one for each cut. If you want more rotation, you can also do that box step that we've talked about elsewhere, where it's actually just like that. Okay, so you have options in terms of stepping. Now, okay, let's actually walk through all the different components that the Stück im Aufstreichen section actually talks about. So there's an initial section which actually talks about sort of a preference about do you do it from one side versus the other side. So Brandon, can you read that section?
Know that there is good fighting from the sweeps, although they are not named in the Zettel. Yet the techniques from the Zettel arise when one fights from them, and one shall execute the sweeps from the left side, because when they are from the right, they are not as certain as from the left.
Okay, so again, this is open to interpretation, but I think it's a reference to this position when I sweep upward on my left, this strong position with the crossed hands, versus when I sweep up on my right, especially if I'm one-handed, this is kind of a weak position. That being said, if you switch to the long edge when you do it, you can also account for that. So I think, if anything, I think it's a suggestion that the Stück im Aufstreichen section is talking about using sweeping with the short edge upward. Okay, so next part.
Item, when you lie in the side guard on your left side and someone cuts high to you from above, then sweep up from below strongly on his sword with the short edge. If he holds strongly against it and is not too high with the hands, Then double in between your opponent and his sword with your short edge on the left side of his neck.
Okay, so these first two things are related to duplieren, effectively, like using its Zwerch, but doing it in a way that is a duplieren. Okay, so basically, so we're setting up, this, we can work off of this pattern. We can use the frequency modus kind of idea, where we're doing a repeating pattern, a flow pattern. So from here, instead of cutting with a Zorn, I can go further this way, which makes it more difficult for him to actually get that parry. He's got to actually come further up somehow in order to get that parry. So it's a very nice way, because we're basically both operating in a place where we're sort of on each other's outsides, right? So as he comes and cuts, here I'm getting to his outside and not only attacking his outside, but actually dupliering on the outside. So that helps keep me extra safe and also manages to sort of attack him at a funny angle. So that's duplieren on this side. And then, so here's an example of sort of two techniques which are pairs, right? So one is doing the duplieren on one side, and then it's going to be duplieren on the other side. So can you read that next piece?
Second piece.
Yep.
Item, when you sweep upward as before on his sword, if he then holds strongly in response, then strike quickly around with the thwart to his left side and double in between the man and his sword with the long edge to the right side of his neck.
Okay, so again, one of the things that they don't talk about is what is the response, right? Like, there are ways to do this where the response on the other side from Blake here makes the duplieren actually hard to do. So I think we're talking about an Aufstreichen kind of sort of standard defense. So that actually is what sort of makes the most sense here. So as he does this, and he presses down. When I come around, he just sweeps on this side, which actually is going to correspond to something we're doing later, the Durchstreichen piece. We'll come back to that. But if he sweeps this way, that allows me to still come this way and threaten from that outside. Again, I'm on his outside when he does the Aufstreichen this way. So I can just keep coming this way. And again, I think the author here is trying to set up and motivate. You can do the Aufstreichen into a doubling or a duplieren Zwerch on both sides. And this is how you do it, okay? So those two really kind of go together. Yep, next.
Item, when you sweep upward as before on his sword, and he is then weak on the sword and low with the hands, then cut to the hand with the long edge high to the opening.
Okay. So to me, this is almost sort of the very standard default, right? So the whole idea is as he's cutting in, I'm going to parry. And by doing this, I'm on his outside. And so I can sort of, you can actually sort of see this with our footwork. So we're doing this right now in a very sort of, we're maintaining our position relative to each other. But if we're really trying to chase each other tactically, the footwork's going to actually look a little bit more circling like this. So, right. So as I get to the outside, if I see that he has not come up quickly enough in order to get that parry, I'm going to go in, right? And I think that's the reference to, if he's too low, if his hands are too low, he's not coming up in response with that Aufstreichen in time, just go. Okay?
Or if he falls strongly with his sword upon yours, then go quickly with the pommel over his sword and remain with the hand thereupon, and let your point go behind to your left side and snap over the middle of your short edge to his head.
So that was a lot of words. Let's kind of go through this. Go ahead. So when he cuts, so now there's some sort of pressure here. It could be sort of like a Zorn kind of pressure, but like especially if it gets to a point where it's more of a crump kind of situation with the blade point low, hands high, that is a standard position where a Schnappen is a really good response. So that's where we get the pommel over the sword, whether it's here or here, and then we get on top. So they mentioned the short edge to the head. And then there's a little bit in there about, can you reread the part about the, keep the hand?
If he falls strongly with his sword upon yours, then go quickly with the pommel over his sword
Yep.
and remain with the hand thereupon and let your point go.
So it could be something like this, or maybe it's this. You know, it's as often with these sources, they don't necessarily give us all the data, right? There's a lot of stuff that's being left unsaid. But I would say we get the broad strokes enough, right? So once he pushes, you know, the idea is to have some sort of cover here with the hand, whether you keep the two hands together or you let go. So it's, you know, I think there are a couple of options that both fit, and they're both good potential techniques. So we have both of those in our toolkit. So that's the Schnappen piece. Okay, next one.
5. Item. When you sweep on his sword, if he follows high up and winds, then strike to him in his right side with straight arms and step therewith backwards.
All right, so from here, right, if I'm going to do not just this, but actually threaten this, that response, getting people to raise their hands like this is very typical, right? So from here, that covers the head, but it also commits the hands high, and you're also kind of chambered at this point to do a very nice outside strike. And I can do that very gently with the flat. It's kind of built for that, nice and easy. So again, we're talking about actually a pair of techniques here. So basically, when you get that crossed hands wind up, and by the way, the original text is not clear. It does not mention the wind, is it with crossed hands or uncrossed hands? Having looked at both, I think it makes sense that we are talking about the crossed hands as a sort of like initial position here for this particular case. So the other side is just like with the Zwerch duplieren piece. How do you set up this also on the other side? There we go. So I think that's the next piece, right? Okay.
Should be.
Yep, go for it.
6. Item. When you sweep upward on his sword, if he follows high up and winds, then strengthen with your long edge. If he then strikes around with the thwart, then strike to his left side with a stepping off.
Right, so let's start that one more time, right? So from here, okay, so if I wind and I push enough that he actually comes around to the other side, that's what I want. That's a perfect place. Anytime that there's this sort of like spheric transition with the hands high, that's a great place to actually be attacking the arms during that transition. That's a good place to do things like the Abschneiden transition, which you can actually look at this as sort of an Abschneiden kind of cut effectively to those arms. And then don't forget about the feet. We're actually going to rotate out as we do that as well. So, okay, cool. So those are two transitions if you can get that commitment of the arms high.
7. Item. When you drive the sweeps to the opponent and he then holds his sword thwartwise before him and is high with his arms and wants to fall on your sword, then sweep from below on his sword and strike in on his arms or thrust to his chest.
Right. Yeah. So this this is one where I think there's sort of different ways to interpret this setup. I think the easiest way from a training perspective is to look at it as this is a great counter to someone doing the duplieren Zwerch, right? So basically, as he cuts, right? So from here, I'm expecting this, but if there's a situation where I can predict this happening, actually, let's turn this way so we can kind of hopefully see this in the camera. Like, so if you're me and you're looking at the opponent, right? If he doesn't raise his arms, if it's down here, then I'm trying to like deal with this plane. But as soon as he raises his arms, there's basically this nice little space here, almost like a triangle, here, here, here with the blade. If I can sneak in here, that is a very nice single time counter and parry, right? So yeah, so just the idea of, you're sweeping, cutting, sweeping, cutting. And we said that when we do the cut, we can actually do this in order to sort of sneak outside and actually threaten at a nasty angle. Sure, that's true, but also right here is where someone can actually get you. And actually is connected to other, that whole thing, there are different ways to get to that position. I think it's related also to the Krumphau Kurzhau option, as well as execution of the rows. Those are all different ways to actually get to this little space underneath someone's incoming ox or plunge cut. So, okay, great. So I think that one is just kind of specifically on that side, although actually does work on the other side from the left. You're just going to be doing that with sort of crossed hands. So yeah, that can be for another video. So, okay, so the text only describes it from that one side. So, next.
8. Item. If he is low with his hands and wants to fall upon you, then sweep through upon the other side and thrust to his chest. Thus have you changed through.
Okay, so I really want to emphasize these last 3 techniques in the series. Super important, not only for Aufstreichen and this idea of now what I would say Durchstreichen, striking through, the same Durch that is used with Durchwechseln, right? It's in fact used here. The term Durchwechseln is mentioned, and I think it's a very important. I don't think it's the first time I've encountered Durchwechseln in this kind of context. So, but this is another example of this very important idea, which is when a cut comes in. Let's actually do Krump for a second. So Krump is the other place where you see this. When Zorn comes in, and we talk about actually crumping short and going through underneath like a Durchwechseln, a lot of people will do this and then some sort of dip under to go to the other side. And you can do that, but it's extra time. It's an extra tempo. So rather than doing that, I think a disengage as an interpretation of Durchwechseln is okay, but there's at least another thing that should be considered, which is a single time. I'm going to cut at this angle, and if for whatever reason I just naturally end up underneath, then I end up underneath and I do my thing, which is the shortcut in this particular case, right? It is not 2 times. It doesn't have to be 2 tempi. Same thing here for Aufstreichen. I'm trying to get underneath to be safe, but the lower he drops, and so more like if the lower he drops with his hands, right? Same angle, right? I'm trying to get under, but at some point his hands become so low that it's hard to do this, but it's super easy to just do this, right? So at some point, if I see this happen, I step here, and then we get into these sort of like 3 scenarios. So really, I'm trying to sweep underneath, but if I get lucky and I can sweep here, that's great, and I can do a couple things. So what's the first example? I think you actually just described the first example, right?
So next is 9. Item. When you sweep through, then fall with the long edge on his sword and wind on the left side so that your thumb comes underneath, and go with your long edge on the right side of his neck with strength. Spring with your right foot behind his left, and pull him with your sword thereover.
Can I just say that you should choose your opponents and targets wisely? This is a great thing for Blake to do to me. Maybe not so good for me to do to Blake, but we'll talk about that in a minute, right? So I do want to go back to the previous thing and just kind of close it out. So here's the incoming cut. When I managed to get on top, the first example, the previous example was I'm going to come in here and basically do an Absetzen. Boom, right? If I can get to that upper right quadrant for him, I can come here, do a setting off an Absetzen right into that shoulder, right? A very sort of Schiel-like technique. Also in the same family of Schiel, sometimes you overshoot. If you overshoot for whatever reason and you end up here, actually keep your foot forward the way you were, right? So this is still okay. So from here, I'm going to come forward, and that's great. I can get to this neck hooking, and I want to keep pressure here, and it's going to be very important that I keep the pressure and really kind of come in and drive so that I can ideally pivot his foot backward and get to this position, right? This is really kind of what I'm looking for. You can already see, by the way, that for someone who is taller and has more mass and all this stuff, this is probably not my first choice. So yeah, pick your targets wisely. But yeah, so in terms of the tactics of getting in, same key piece. If you can Durchstreichen, Durchwechseln, to the other side and get on top of the opponent's blade, then you can corkscrew up and either go for that target to the shoulder or past the shoulder and get the neck hook and throw. Okay. So yeah, so those are a couple things in terms of the initial immediate thing after you do the Durchstreichen. The last bit here is, it sounds like general advice, but I think it's like super important, and we have to do a little bit of like more broad interpretation. But I'll show you what I think the implication is, and it's almost like doubling everything that we just talked about. Like we can do all of those things literally on the other side. So go ahead.
10. Item. When you come out of the sweeps, having changed through to the other side above his sword, then you may drive this technique equally as well to the other side, with tag hits and with all things as before.
Right. So the way that we're interpreting this is he's cutting from here, right? This is what we're doing normally. If I get this opportunity, as soon as I sweep to the other side, there's an opportunity for me to actually, just stay here for a second. I go clear and I can just hit, right? I don't have to do this extra turning, stepping in stuff. I can literally just go boom, right? I can cut from my left, but when I'm here, he's also underneath. So as long as he's paying attention and he's got good technique and he understands, like from here, as soon as that happens, he can outstrike immediately, and we can then end up doing outstriking basically on the left side. So it's actually a really fantastic flow drill, if you can do it, in a way to actually do this outstriking flow where you're doing Zorn from the right, and then if you do a Durchstreichen transition, you can then transition into the flow drill with Zorn coming from your left. So again, that's definitely like another easy video that we can do at some point, just to kind of show that transition and just general application of flow drills and all of that kind of stuff. But this is a video I've been wanting to do for a long time because there's so much good meat in this series of techniques, which actually come from early sources, from the manuscript with Ringak. So this is, I'm going to circle back to something that they said at the beginning, which is, yeah, this is not associated necessarily with the master cuts or whatever, but it's definitely related. Like using the stuff is related and really essential to that whole art of actually kind of setting up all the stuff that's needed for the master cuts. So big picture, there's a lot of emphasis, for instance, on Krump as a defense. I think even though this is not spelled out nearly as often, Aufstreichen and these sweeps from underneath are, I think, just as important, if not more so, than Krump as a critical defense, especially a dynamic defense where it's not static parries. You're actually using cutting motions in order to sweep aside the incoming cuts from below. If you're not doing it, it's something that is a huge thing that you can add to your arsenal. And by the way, I think in sort of conventional tournament even, people are doing it. They're just not taking it as far as they could. So for instance, if Blake here is in sort of like a standard plow position that you see a lot often in tournament, people are already doing these sorts of things where there's like hand snipes, right? Those are Aufstreichen actually. They're just very abbreviated Aufstreichen. So if you're going to be doing this anyway, you could totally be doing stuff like this, where from here, boom, boom, right? So it's not just snipe the hands, it's also cover the blade from underneath using these kind of techniques. So that's plenty for today. The one other segue for the future, and it's worth showing this dynamically. So let's set up the Aufstreichen flow, right? So cutting from the right, stop. So right now we're kind of doing this in a way where we come off the blade. We don't have to, okay? So watch as we transition this into a wind. So you see this winding action that actually is happening as we're sort of attacking from the outside and then closing on your inside. This flow seems like cutting while you're winding, right? Could it possibly be then related to something actually called a winding cut somewhere? We'll find out in a future video and come back to that. So stay tuned.
Yep. Yep. Let's slow this down a little bit. Rolling. Or boom. There we go. Or boom. Yep. Won't line. Yep. This way. Boom. Okay. Again. And then. There we go. Yeah. Yep. This one you. Sorry, I do this. Right. There we go. Yep. Yep. My bad. Okay. There we go. My 2, 3. Yep. Good. Yep. There we go. Yeah. Woo! I kind of missed. Boom. Yeah. Boom. Right. From here, if I do this, I want you to outstrike. And then from here, now we're on the left. Right, okay. Yeah.